You may have noticed that the genealogies are different in Matthew and Luke. So there are different ways to explain this, but the most commonly held belief about that is that Luke is actually Mary's genealogies and Matthew is actually Joseph's genealogies. And so when it says Joseph, the son of Heli, what it actually means is Joseph, the son-in-law of Heli, in the Luke genealogies. So if this is true, I think something really interesting about it is that the kings, you may have noticed as you're reading through in Matthew that all of those names of the genealogies, a whole bunch of them you might be familiar with, because we read about all of those stories of the kings in the Old Testament, and those are in the genealogies of Matthew. So if this is what is commonly believed as Joseph's genealogies, then Jesus, he's the son of David by both Mary and Joseph, by blood and by adoption, and by Mary's blood and being adopted by Joseph. But his claim to the throne of David would be through Joseph, through Matthew's genealogies. And I think as an adoptive mother, it's really cool to me that not only did God choose to have his son, to have Jesus, and this is also God when he came on earth, be raised by an adoptive father, but he also had he feels so strongly about adoption that Jesus' claim to David's throne was through adoption. So did you try to picture some of these scenes as you read? Did you notice a lot of times it talks about the crowd? And there's thousands of people and they're pressing in on him. At one point it says that Jesus and the disciples had to get away because the crowd was crushing them. Can you imagine that? All of these people just pressing in on Jesus. That's what it was like all the time for Jesus and his disciples. I mean, he's healing people and he's making bread out of nothing, and so the people they want to be around him. They're yelling his name, they're cheering for him, they're following him miles and listening to him teach. But the thing is, they were pretty fickle, weren't they? They were right there with him when he was making bread and he was healing their sick, but they didn't really care about what he had to say. They were just using him for what he could do for them. They were using him for the bread. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? Here God is in the flesh, and they're treating him the exact same way that they treated God in the Old Testament. Do you see the similarity between what Jesus is experiencing here and what the people are saying to him, and what God experienced and what the people were saying to him? Jesus was saying, love me, know me, believe in me, get angry about injustice, love people. And the people were shouting back at him, give us more bread, do more miracles. Did you notice he went off on his own a lot to pray? Does it strike you that in a 3-year ministry, his limited time here on earth, he chose to devote so much time to solitude? What does that say about the importance of solitude and time alone with God? He spoke of his death, his crucifixion, and his resurrection many times. It was not just once, it was on a number of occasions. And he didn't just say it in some super vague way or in a parable. He said, I'm going to be crucified, and 3 days later I will rise again, and then you will understand these things. His biggest concern towards the end of his life was that his disciples love each other. That's what he prayed about, that's what he talked about, that's what he believed would show the world who he was. He came to reveal God to the people. And he said, this is how you are going to continue that revelation, how you, my disciples, are going to reveal God to the world. You're going to do it by how you love each other. He had emotions. Like the God of the Old Testament, he experienced things with the humans, and he had feelings about it. And if he is the same God as the God of the Old Testament, the Father and the Son, but they are one, then, and he said that he came to reveal the Father to us, then we can see Jesus' emotions, and we can say that shows us what God is like. What did Jesus feel? What did the God of the universe feel and experience when he was on this planet? All right, here's a few things that I found. He was moved with compassion. His heart overflowed with compassion. I didn't write all the times that it said that. It said that many times, that he was moved with compassion. He was amazed at people's unbelief. So he felt amazement, and that's what it was at. He had compassion. He said at one point, I feel sorry for these people because they were hungry. Even though it was just a physical need and he was bringing great spiritual need, he felt sorry for the people. He had compassion for them. He was moved by what he saw. At one point it says he sighed deeply in his spirit. Can you just kind of try to wrap your head around that? He's the God of the universe. And what he's experiencing makes him sigh deeply in his spirit. He rejoices over lost sheep. He's filled with joy at one point. He says at one point, how often I wanted to gather you under my wings, but you wouldn't let me. So he's feeling for Jerusalem and saying that he has these desires, these longings for Jerusalem. He was angry about children being turned away. He looked at a young man and felt genuine love for him. When he saw blind men, Jesus felt sorry for them, it says. He looked at Jerusalem and he began to weep. There's two places that Jesus wept. Once, Lazarus' death, and the other one was when he just looked at Jerusalem. It moved him to tears. When he was talking about his death, he said, my soul is deeply troubled. And at another point, it says that he was deeply troubled that one of his followers was going to betray him. It says that he loved his disciples. His response to death when his friend Lazarus died and he came before he resurrected Lazarus, this is his response to death. Is it, oh, well, he's better off. He's in a better place. And this was God's time for him. Is that how Jesus, what was his response to a friend's death and the grief that his friends were experiencing? It says, an anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. And in that same situation, it says that Jesus wept. An anger welled up within him. He had an emotional response to death. Jesus knew that he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead. That was just minutes away. But yet, in that moment, he was deeply troubled. He was moved. Something welled up within him about what was happening. It brings me back to what we've talked about over and over again, this God that is fully present in the moment, even though he knows that he's going to change the moment completely. In that moment, it was sad. Someone had died, the brother of these sisters. It was Jesus' friend. And he fully entered into that moment and he felt it with them. He was there with them. Even though he knew he was going to change the story completely after that. I think a lot of times when we imagine God looking at us in our grief or in our sorrow when something happens that we're struggling with, a lot of times we think of him as sort of saying, well, this is for your good, or that person's in a better place, or kind of being above it all and not being affected by what happens here on earth, because he says, well, I will use it for your good. And so we think that because he's going to use it for our good, he's actually happy that bad things are happening to us, right? Because he's going to use it so that we can minister to other people or something. But we see in this story that even though he knew he was going to use it for good and to bring God much glory, and he was going to turn the weeping into rejoicing, in that moment, it was sad, and he was troubled and grieved. He felt compassion for those people. And I hope that when you are going through whatever it is you may be going through now or in the future, that you can sort of experience, imagine, see that God's response to that is sad, because what you're going through is sad. And he gets that, and he's there with you in that, even though he can take it and use it for something beautiful in the future. Briefly, in John 12, 27 and 28, one of the places where it talks about God's failings, he's talking about his death that he's going to go through in the crucifixion. And he says, my soul is deeply troubled. Should I pray, Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. He was deeply troubled about what was going to happen to him. But he thought it through, and he realized the most important thing is God's glory, my Father's glory. My soul is deeply troubled, but Father, glorify your name. What if God's glory was the most important thing? In the next week and a half, we're going to be reading the story of Jesus' betrayal, death, and resurrection. But I want to share a few thoughts about those events today. And then next month, the video will kind of pick up at the Ascension of Christ. So this year, the whole year, as I've been reading the Old Testament and thinking ahead about Jesus and kind of how those things fit together, there's something that just, I guess it occurred to me like never before, or it resonated like never before. And that is that this story that, I mean, if you guys have ever seen The Passion, it's heart-wrenching, right? The movie, The Passion of Christ. If you've ever been to an Easter service where they talk about the physical pain that Jesus went through, the suffering that he went through, and the crucifixion, it's hard to watch. It's hard to listen to, right? Because it was unimaginable physical suffering. But this whole year, this thought has just been on me. That Jesus' suffering as our Savior at the cross, that it wasn't something new. That it was just, it was the same story that we've read all along. The God of the Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament, including his suffering, I saw those stories so tied together through through God allowing himself to be affected by the humans. And he has experienced abandonment and betrayal, and he has experienced like emotional pain at the hand of the humans, which this is crazy, right? As many times as I've said it, it still kind of sounds, I don't know, like heresy or something, or disrespectful, because he's God. And I know that sometimes the way I talk, it almost makes God sound like he's a victim. He's not a victim, because a victim is powerless. God is not powerless. He could stop any of this at any time. He could allow it to continue, what the humans are doing, and not be affected by it. He could remove his heart from it. But he doesn't. For some reason that I don't understand, he allows himself to be vulnerable. Vulnerable means that you're open for attack. It means that you can be hurt. If you're not vulnerable, you cannot be hurt. God, he is absolutely powerful. He's sovereign, which means he's like in control of all things. But at the same time, and these things, they seem like they should be mutually exclusive. There's a lot of things in the Bible like that, right? That seem like they should be mutually exclusive. Like either this is true or that is true. But no, they're both true. And this is one of those where God, he is sovereign. He is all powerful, all in control of all things. Yet at the same time, he's vulnerable in that he allows himself to be affected and even hurt by the human story. And so here we are in the New Testament, and God, he has put on flesh, and he has come down to walk among the humans. I have this picture in my mind of God saying, you don't care about me. You only care about the humans. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a human. You don't care about my pain, but you care about the human's pain. So I will be a human, and I will be vulnerable to physical pain, because that's what you can understand. All along, I've been hurt by you. I've been betrayed by you. And I have felt like I've been kicked in the gut by you, by the humans, by our story together. But now I'm going to become a human, and I'm going to take that betrayal, the emotional pain, the betrayal, and even physical pain. I'm going to put on a body so that I can be vulnerable to be hurt by you, so that you can see how much I care, how affected I am by you. So Jesus accomplished much with the cross. It's through the cross that he was able to pay the debt for our sin. That's why we're able to be forgiven, why we don't have to sacrifice animals daily, because Jesus paid the debt for all of our sin when he died on the cross. He was the ultimate sacrifice. So there's different elements, there's different layers to the cross. There's the work that he accomplished, and that was part of God's plan. But also God is showing us, look what I'm willing to do for you. I'm willing to put on flesh and let that flesh be torn so that you can see this is our story. This is what things are like between us. You betray me, and I pay the cost. I don't know if you guys remember all the way back at, I think it was the second video we did, I talked about how God walked through the pieces of flesh for this covenant between him and Abraham. Well, Abraham slept. And normally when a deal is made, the people would walk through the flesh together saying, if one of us breaks this deal, whoever breaks the deal, made this happen to them, that like the animal was torn in half and they would walk between the pieces of flesh. At this point, for thousands of years now, the people have rejected God and they have broken the covenant that God and Abraham made. Abraham's descendants have broken the covenant. But just like at the very beginning of that story, God said, I'm going to walk through the flesh alone while Abraham sleeps, because in the end, when he and his descendants break the covenant, I will be the one that is torn apart to pay for that breach of contract, for the breaking of this covenant. And Jesus does that. He allows his flesh to be torn apart because the covenant had been broken so that he could be back in relationship with them. In addition to all this, God says, I'm not only going to feel the pain physically, firsthand as a human, but I'm going to do something else that I think might resonate with you. As I'm also going to experience this pain from the perspective as a parent watching it happen to their child. This is the pain. This is the vulnerability that God was willing to take for us. The all-powerful God of the universe that's in control of all things. He allowed himself to be vulnerable to the cross, to the physical pain, to the emotional pain. And it wasn't just at the cross. It was his whole story with humanity. I remember when right before I got married, someone gave me a sticker about marriage, and I stuck it in the front of my Bible. And it said, I know that you will hurt me, disappoint me, and betray me. But knowing that ahead of time, I still choose you. It was a great help in the early years of my marriage to just know it's not about always being happy. He's going to disappoint me and hurt me. But in this story, God, he knew that we would disappoint him. He knew that we would betray him. He knew about all the pain he was going to go through. And knowing that ahead of time, knowing what it would cost him, he still chose you. He still chose me. He still chose to go through all of that pain, because what he wanted is an intimate relationship with the humans, and he was willing to get that at whatever cost.